Imagine this. You are in your late 20s, and you are meeting with the marketing department and communications department at a pretty large insurance company. And you set up this meeting because you're scoping out a brand new project for them. It's your job to figure out the solution, the timelines, and the budget to help solve this client's problems. And so you've been working with the marketing department, you've been working with communications, and you asked for a meeting to work through the scope with a few of the key stakeholders, a few senior leaders, so that way you can get everyone on the same page and make sure that when you give them that proposal, you have buy-in from all levels, so that way you don't waste your time. Sounds like a pretty ordinary or average sales process, doesn't it? And so you show up the day of the meeting, on time, ready to go, and as you're walking towards the boardroom, your contact, the person in charge of marketing, says, "Oh, we collected a few of the senior leaders like you asked." And then they open up the door, and as you walk in, there are 18 C-suite executives sitting around the boardroom table. And remember, you're in your late 20s, so it's not like you have all of the business experience compared to what you are now facing, a room full of senior executives who are all looking at you wondering why the heck they got called around this boardroom table for a 2-hour meeting. Now, if this sounds like this is a real story, it's because it is, and it happened to me. It happened to me years ago, but it was such an impactful moment in my career because it was the moment that I realized, despite your age, despite your experience, and despite where you may feel you are compared to these C-suite senior executives that are working in their executive offices, despite the fact that you do not have that background and you do not have that experience, you can command the room. And the way I learned this was because I sat down facing a 2-hour window of time with all of these senior leaders around the table. And I thought, oh my goodness, at least the marketing manager is going to lead the meeting and I'll just be able to take notes and kind of pop in left or right, when the timing is right. But no. That did not happen. Instead, they set up the meeting by saying, "Hey guys, this is what we're here. This is what we're doing. I know none of you know any project background. I know you don't have any line of sight on what we're doing here today, but that's why we brought in Mark. Okay, Mark, over to you." And in that moment, I could take control of the room. I had to take control of the situation. I had to make sure that I asked the right questions in the right order in a way that at least didn't make them feel like they were wasting their time. And in that moment, I just thought, okay, how do I not embarrass myself in front of everyone? In this episode, we are going to talk about that and so much more because today's guest, Julie Thomas, is an expert at how to manage C-suite sales conversations to make sure you come in and you don't waste their time, you drive a ton of value, and you get what you need out of the conversation, which is to move them forward to the next step. Now, Julie Thomas is an expert in sales leadership and really value selling strategies to help business owners and their teams effectively engage in high-level executive conversations. Welcome to How to Sell More, a masterclass for ambitious B2B leaders like you. If you're in marketing, business development, or a high-level business owner, this podcast is for you. I'm your host, Mark Drager. Let's get into it. So Julie, you, of course, have made a career out of focusing on value selling. I mean, you are a speaker and your organization focuses on value selling, and you've written a book on value selling. And so I think I've had many conversations on this podcast where people talk about, understanding your customers and bridging the gap between sales and marketing and, being relationship driven. And if you're selling to someone lower in the organization, it's different than the C-suite. But very few people that I've spoken to on this podcast have talking about how we get in front of the C-suite. How do we get the meeting? How do we get the opportunity? What do we go in with? How do we even make the most of let's say we're lucky enough to get half an hour or an hour of someone's time. How do we go about that?
Well, that is the conundrum, right? Because people spend their time and their attention before they spend their money. So the reality is you've got...
Hold on. What does that mean? I like it. I was thinking about it. I was like, wow, that should be on Instagram. What does that mean? They spend their time and attention before their money.
Time is probably one of the scarcest resources of most executives. Like they're back to back to back to back meetings that go longer than they should, meetings they don't want to have about things they don't want to talk about. So time is a premium. I mean, if you figure maybe they work 8 hours a day, maybe they work 10 hours a day, that's still a limited amount of time to meet with all the vendors that would love to meet with them. So the first thing is, when you get that meeting with them and when you ask for a meeting with them, it can't be to talk about you. Like I can't just say, hey, how would you like to spend 45 minutes and let me tell you how great I am or how great my product is? Or better yet, let me just do a demo of my product for you.
But let me interrupt real quick because I love this. We've already jumped to when you get the meeting with them. If we take a step back, are we typically going, mid-level and then selling through mid-level up and then earning the right to the meeting? Are we talking of the situation where, for whatever reason, we've been able to get maybe a network referral or a link into that C-suite person, and we're like first point of contact to C-suite? What are we talking about typically?
Well, I think it could be either, right? I mean, in an ideal world, if you sell something that you know is going to require C-suite involvement, if you can get there either through a referral or through some sort of a top-to-top executive alignment type meeting, and you've got either you or your company have the credibility that they'd be willing to meet with you, you're going to take that meeting. And obviously, you're going to work to get that meeting. Most of the time, I think, while we shoot high, we land low, and then we try to navigate from there. So how do we either bargain for access to that? I mean, in some cases, it's hard for the sales rep to even identify who is the right executive that they should be talking to, let alone know how to get on their calendar. So I think you've got to identify them. You've got to have a number of strategies to gain access. Best is always a referral. If I can get referred into somebody by somebody that they trust or respect, I've got the best shot of getting a quick meeting with that individual. That doesn't always happen either.
Another great way in, and I'm hesitant to share sometimes these things because I don't know if it's just like really worked for me and the people in my network, or if it's more universal, and maybe you can help us understand that. But, I've found that often with really complex situations or complex sales, you can answer all of the mid-level or even senior-ish level person, but then when they have to turn around and create a value prop internally in a business case, often they can't even speak to the level of detail that a sales rep can. And so I tend to try to suggest that you could bring me in as a subject matter expert to help guide the conversation between mid-level and senior level, because I happen to know more about it than anyone else. And I found that worked well, but I don't know if that's the case across the board.
I think that's a great tactic. And that's kind of what I call negotiating for access. So that is that's turning what some people might say is a gatekeeper or the middle manager who's responsible maybe for making a recommendation, but certainly not responsible for the decision itself, turning them into a bridge builder to go through that. But what has to happen for that to work well is they have to trust you, because if they think that they're going to bring you into that C-suite and you're going to make them look like an idiot, you're dead, right? So you've got to build that trust, build that respect, build that credibility, and then negotiate for that access. And I think that is a very powerful way to do it.
Okay, so I love how I feel like we're going to get into some nuance here. So if that were the case, you spend the time, you build the trust, you put the time in, you do what you need to do, and then now we're in front of the C-suite, and now it's almost the exact opposite. Like we almost will never have enough time to be able to lead and scope as we should, right?
Yeah, but I think you have to also understand that the conversation is different. So that middle manager, that director level, or the user buyer level that you're talking about tactical problems and components of your solution that are going to address that. You get up to that C-suite, they don't care about the solution. They care about getting rid of the problem that's getting in the way of their business outcomes, and then how quickly can they get to those outcomes. There's other people that are going to worry about the details of how it all works. They want to talk about big problems, big impact, and how are we going to partner with them to make sure they get the results they want.
And so is thinking of all of these situations where I'm not sure I accounted for this properly. And the reason why it's coming to mind is because I naturally, if you're sitting across from someone who is outcome focused, of course, you're not going to sell like the solution. You're going to sell the outcome. And as soon as you start to sell the outcome, you go very high level, you go very generic. They tend to be broader strokes, broader terms. But in the back of my mind, I'm always thinking like, shit, like I need to figure out the specifics of how it will work and brief my team on it. And how do I onboard them and how do I transfer it? And can we customize that over here? And can that happen? Like I naturally, by the fact that I can be having an outcome-based conversation with another outcome-based person. But at the end of the day, my team has to be able to deliver. We have to deliver. We have to get into the nitty-gritty. And I think I've fallen into trouble when I start to worry about those things when I'm sitting across from someone who's not worried about those things at all, right?
Well, I mean, I think it's interesting. You get the C-suite meeting, right? And the question is, what's the objective of that meeting? Is the objective of that meeting to recognize that there is a solution to something that they might not thought they could have addressed? Is the objective of that meeting to establish some credibility and give that executive confidence that been there, done that, have the T-shirt, we are a risk-less alternative or option for you. But I think too many people don't think about what's my purpose of being there. They're just told call high, get high. That's where big decisions are made. Get high.
But is it? Let's all get high. Thanks. Now this episode is not going to be able to make it on YouTube. I appreciate that. But that aside,
call higher.
Have a higher calling.
Yes.
But aside from that, it's always our objective. But should we also be focused on their objective as well?
Of course you do.
Okay.
You have to align to their objective first.
Right.
It's not about your agenda. If you go in with your agenda, you're pushing a rope. And what happens, it's like when you've got your arm out and somebody starts to push on it, you build resistance. So you don't want to push, you want to create that pull. And while it's easy to say, it's the elegance is in how you conversationally prepare to have a deliberate, intentional conversation that gets you to where you're trying to go with that executive. And so how are we preparing? What questions are we going to ask? What stories are we going to tell to kind of illustrate or get that executive thinking about the potential of what we can bring to the table? And how do we get them to lean in? Because 90% of the time when I have an executive meeting, my objective is another meeting.
I love that you used the word
one and done.
Yeah, I love that you lean in because I used to wait for the moment in a meeting. And I subscribe, so B2B business. We are a service-based business. We have a fairly complex, customized delivery. So all I was ever looking for was more time, more access, more time, more access. I don't care how long the sales process takes, because if we're getting board access, if we're getting C-suite access, senior executive access, if they're bringing 13, 15 people around a table for a 2 or 3 hour meeting pre-sale, I feel like there's some level of commitment that's being given towards the process. So I'm always looking for that. But you said lean in. And I would always look for that time where if it was a question or if it was an idea, or if it was a thought, and there was this moment where like you could almost feel the energy change in the room. You could feel the excitement. You could feel them like start to lean forward or lean in or think, oh, that's interesting. And you could feel this dynamic change. And that is what I was always going for with any time that I'm sitting across from anyone, is just trying to break down whatever walls might be there to get to the point where co-creating some kind of outcome together, hopefully.
Yeah, I agree. I think meetings that are going well typically are collaborative. Like you said, we're co-creating something. We're in it together to get you the outcomes that you're looking for. But the ones that get really exciting, I think often are the ones where that buyer gets some level of insight. They like whether it's something that you said or a light bulb went off or that connection was made, and then they're like, aha, now I get it. Now I see where this is going. Now I see what the possibility could be. Yes, when I get that feeling, and it's rarely because we did a great demo or showed them a beautiful, elegantly designed user interface, it's usually because of a conversation and something that came out of that conversation that was insightful, that we shared something that they hadn't considered or they didn't know, and helped them recognize a pattern that they might not have recognized before. Whatever that is, It's in those moments where now we've added value to them during the conversation. So value selling is not just focusing on the value of doing business with me. It's also focused on the value of the relationship, because how I sell today is just as important as what I sell today.
Let's imagine that, we're about to meet with someone's C-suite. Maybe we're a little bit nervous or a little unsure of how things were going to go. Again, I've met with thousands of people, and every time that I think I've seen it all, I'm surprised sometimes. I'm surprised at what happens. And so I try to go in just like along for the ride because I'm never quite sure. But if we're prepping perhaps some ideas of stories we might want to draw upon, or similar case studies we might want to leverage, or questions that we think might help open up a conversation. Aside from that, do you have a suggestion or a process for the best way to prep? And I'm talking about the minutes before, they walk in the room, or you're sitting in the lobby waiting, or you're about to jump on the Zoom call and you're sitting there and you're counting down and there's like 3 minutes left. In those moments, what should we be doing to make sure that we show up with the full intention of providing value?
Well, I think there's a couple things that we can do. So first of all, if you've got a critical executive sales call, I hope you're spending more than 3 minutes thinking about what you want to accomplish in that call. So, I think there's the things that we do right beforehand, which is take a deep breath, try to eliminate the distractions around us, try to get myself centered so that I'm focused on what I'm doing. But before that, I'm doing some research on the individual, and I'm not stalking you, but I'm going to know a little bit about you. The good news is that's not hard to do these days. I either have research, because we have some clients that have the research fed to them, but I understand the company. I understand the role that individual's in. I understand a little bit about their industry. I don't need to be a financial analyst. I don't need to be an industry expert in their industry, but I need to know enough to be relevant to that individual. And then the questions that I'm preparing to drive the dialogue are not questions that I should know the answer to because I should have looked at their website. Like, they're the questions that go beyond the circumstances and the situations to the real root cause of why something might not be working the way they want it to work in their business. Because the first principle of value selling, and this is not rocket science, is that people need a reason to change. And that reason is just not that I haven't showed up yet to show them how great my product is. So we need to tap into that and focus on that reason to change. And that's where the conversation starts. We want to be diagnostic before we're prescriptive. And sales reps that prepare for those types of conversations outperform those that show up as demo dollies and just want to talk about their product or their solution or show their widget or whatever it is.
I'm going to be honest. I struggle with these conversations because everything you're saying sounds so correct, sounds so right, and sounds so obvious to me. And I imagine that there are people who just show up and want to go through the steps and go through the demo. But I so rarely come across people who sell that way these days. And I'm wondering if this is still something that's really present, that people are really struggling with, or I don't know. Have we matured out of it?
I don't think so.
No?
I bet I have.
You know what I'm saying though? Like I hear everything you're saying. And I'm like, yes, I agree. I agree. That's why we have you here. It's amazing. You have you're preaching. I love it. But then on the other side, I go, do people still like people still just do that? They show up, they have a script, they have a process. Don't break my process. Don't slow me down. Don't ask any questions. Don't get in the way. Like, people still sell that way?
Well, I think people sell in a way, I think, especially if you're selling software, good, bad, or indifferent, the goal is to get you to demo as quickly as possible. So discovery.
That's so funny. I hate demos. Maybe I don't come across this because I break every single salesperson's process every single time.
But I bet I have 5 emails between LinkedIn and my email today. I bet I have 5 requests for somebody to show me something.
Right.
If you'll just give me
Oh, I get those. I just
20
ignore them all.
minutes and I show you my software, like you're going to figure it out, Julie, why you need this. And you're going to open the checkbook and buy it for your whole team. So, unfortunately, I still do think in certain industries, yeah. And if you even look at a lot of companies, they spend a whole lot more time training people on their products and their solutions than they do on how to engage buyers.
I suppose that the challenge is if you don't have a lot of C-suite experience or experience working in or around C-suite or even dealing at that level, it can be very, very intimidating to have to come in. You know what? I had a few pivotal moments in my career, but one of them was a senior strategist who left some of the largest companies as a CMO, started their own strategy firm, and he called me into his office. And this person has maybe 30 years experience on me. And I come in and it's him and his business partner. And I'm thinking, what am I doing? Like, I'm actually pretty intimidated here. But I realized with the questions they were asking, they didn't know what I knew. They didn't understand what I understood. They just didn't have, like, they have spent so long at a senior level speaking to senior levels that there was a gap in their knowledge and gap in their organizational knowledge, and no one in the organization had the information I had. And in that moment, I realized, yes, they are far more senior. They operate at a different level. They are breathing rare. I'm breathing rare air being around them, but just don't know what I know, and I can help them. And that kind of shifted everything for me.
I do think a lot of people are intimidated when they get to the C-suite because those are high stakes meetings. Those are kind of, you either, there's going to be an outcome, and the outcome is either going to be, yes, I want to learn more, or yes, I want to continue this, or oh my God, don't ever let that bonehead back in my office, right? And so those are high stakes meetings, and we need to be prepared. Now, there's all different ways you can prepare for those meetings, and a lot of organizations, you're not going to send in the junior rep by themselves for those types of meetings. Not saying that every meeting has to have a posse, but there is a power of having top to top and bridging some of those gaps with that expertise. But I mean, when I was first in sales and selling technology advisory services in my mid 20s, there was nobody I called on that was within 20 years of me. That most of them were technical. I was not. I didn't know the substance of what I was selling. I knew what I was selling, but I didn't know what all this other stuff was. And it didn't matter because I could ask really good questions. I could build great relationships. I could be interested in what people were saying to me and take enough notes. And if I didn't understand the acronym they shared with me, would ask the question without feeling like, oh my gosh, should I know what that is? Because 90% of the time it's an acronym that's specific to their company anyways, and have all those conversations. And I was a top performer. And I didn't have to have all that subject matter expertise. I knew how to get those right people. So I think, that's what's really powerful about selling. It's a human communication process. And you can be a great communicator, which, oh, by the way, includes listening. It's not just your ability to share your message. It's your ability to understand their message without judgment, without waiting to respond, for pure understanding perspective. And when you can do that, you will be successful because you'll be better at making the connections with the individuals you're talking to.
Before we hit record, we were talking a bit about what's happening with AI and the fact that a human touch, as things become more automated and more systematized and more high volume, that little unscalable activity, that little human touch will go a lot further. I'd be curious, in terms of all of your experience, what are the 2 or 3 little tips? Let's hear some of the secrets. What are the 2 or 3 little tips that you always go back to be able to make that connection with that C-suite person?
I think it's authenticity. I think it truly is being authentic, being credible, being respectful, establishing rapport, and being trustworthy. And being trustworthy means that you believe I'm capable, I'm believable, I'm consistent, and I have the ability to do what I said I can do. And if you believe those 4 things about me, you're likely going to trust me. So I think that is more important. I think we're all going to get really sick of bots. I think we're all really going to get sick of the generic, unauthentic, unhuman copy that's being generated that just doesn't have the color that a real story would have. And the interesting thing about generative AI, to get it to work well, you have to ask it really good prompts. To get sales to work well, you have to be able to prompt your buyer really well. It's the same mechanism. What you put out there is what you're going to get back. But I think it's going to be really interesting to see how generative AI just change. I mean, AI has been around for a long time, and it hasn't made a difference. Like, how many AI forecasting models have we all seen over the last 5-10 years? And guess what? Forecasting still hasn't improved. So AI's been here. It's the generative aspect of it that makes it easy for you or I to use it in our day-to-day work that I think is going to be really interesting.
This has been, I've really enjoyed talking to you, like, for 2 things. One, this is maybe a bit more of a therapy session than most of my episodes. I'm like, well, hey, let me bounce a few things up here and get your thoughts and maybe a bit of reassurance. But I love being able to talk about operating at a much higher level, because a lot of the tactics out there and a lot of the strategies are not about seeking out that consultative, value-based conversation where, you know what, like, it's okay if halfway through the conversation things blow up and go wrong. I had a meeting last week with someone where I had created an entire roadmap based on 3 assumptions that I told them was based on 3 assumptions, because otherwise we wouldn't be able to move forward with anything. And then halfway through, they're like, well, but what if we want to go a different way and not follow that second assumption? And I said, well, then everything I'm about to tell you isn't valid anymore. So it's like, cool, let's park that then. Let's park all this hard work. Let's park all this thinking. Let's park all of that. And now let's have a conversation over here about this totally different direction that we never anticipated, because you've flipped some of our assumptions. And so I like playing in that space, because I find everything else a little bit boring and a little bit dull and not challenging enough. And I like having these types of conversations, because I do sometimes forget that, maybe I'm 20 years into my career, and when I was starting out, I wasn't able to operate quite at that level.
No, I think part of that comes from confidence, right? And confidence comes also from having a little bit of courage and having some competence in what you're doing, that you don't have to be in this lane, this narrow lane. The lane can go to here as long as I understand how I'm going to navigate back and forth. And, early on in my career, at least, if I thought I needed to be here and somebody got out here, I was so uncomfortable, I froze.
So I wonder, does this just, hey, if you're young or you're early in your career and you're listening to this and you're beating yourself up, like, I'm wondering if some of it just has to come with experience and reps, and if you can forgive yourself for those nerves and just get over it. Like, I'm wondering if there's a way you can leapfrog some of this stuff simply by accepting it, understanding where it's coming from and why it's happening, and then just saying objectively, like, let's just get the reps in.
And we're never going to win them all. So sometimes you win, sometimes you learn. And every opportunity at bat that you have is an opportunity to learn something. And so find the lesson. Some of us have to learn the same lesson again and again and again. But eventually when we learn it, we're like, that's where the wisdom comes, and that's where the experience comes. And that's where you get to the point where, like, you know what? He's just an executive. And guess what? I bet he was out in the backyard mowing the lawn this weekend, just like I was, and doing all the same other stuff. And I don't need to be intimidated. We're just people. But that's experience and understanding that. And if you didn't grow up, if you are a young salesperson and you didn't grow up with those people around you, like I grew up in a working class home, and I wasn't in and around business people because that's not who my parents were, then you've got to probably gain a little bit of that confidence through experience. But nobody's going to shoot you. Nobody's going to hurt you. Nobody's going to, rarely does anybody even kick you out of their office. They'll be polite, They might not take your call again, but you'll be fine.
That was Julie Thomas. To wrap up, I'm going to share my 3 biggest takeaways from this talk. Number 1, you have to build trust with C-suite people. I mean, their BS detectors are off the charts. Everyone is coming to them all the time with their problems and asking them for more and more and more and more and more. And their job is to make key strategic decisions without all the facts. So by the time you've hit the C-suite, you are very, very good at trying to discern whether someone is trying to take one over on you or not. So you need to establish credibility and trust early in the conversation. Number 2, there is an art form to value selling, which means that you need to sell the outcome, not the products. Make sure that all of your focus is on the challenges in front of us and defining what those are, creating a clear path to the outcome that people want, and then being really open and honest about the different challenges that may exist or the different known unknowns. Lay out the path for them and make sure that you sell outcomes and the value of working with you over the process or the products. And number 3, especially in B2B, you're navigating complex sales processes, which means the thought of just coming in and then getting it closed, getting it done in one step, it's not the way that this is going to work. You have to negotiate access and you have to look for your wins. So while they may try to take control of the situation and tell you and dictate to you how they think it should work, this is your opportunity to take a step back and say, well, with respect, I understand that you're looking for outcome A, B, and C, but in our experience, the best way to approach it is this, in which case I need access to you. I need time. I need your team. I need your insight. I need to shape this for you. And instead of trying to sell the actual deal, make sure that you negotiate access to the information you need to help them understand how you're putting the pieces in place to come up with a custom solution to address their concerns. And so there you have it. Those were my 3 biggest takeaways from this talk, but I am curious, what were yours? Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? You want to get into an argument? I love it. Either way, be a part of this conversation by heading over to LinkedIn and sending me a direct message. My name is Mark Drager. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm super active there. And while you're over there, be sure to connect with our guest, Julie Thomas. You can also get a copy of her book, The Power of Value Selling, and you can learn more about her by heading over to her website, valueselling.com. Now, one last thing. If you've made it this far into the show, you really should subscribe. And here's why. Each week, I share practical strategies and tips just like what Julie shared with us today to supercharge your business growth and to boost sales. With that, we're going to call this another episode, and I will catch you in the next one. I'm Mark Drager. We'll see you then.